The perfect illusion. Elena's fingers moved with practiced precision across the damaged canvas, her restoration brush barely disturbing the centuries-old paint. The Baroque masterpiece had arrived at their home studio just last week, another prestigious commission that would add to her growing reputation in the art world. She glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. Marcus wouldn't be home from his business conference until tomorrow evening, giving her the perfect opportunity to lose herself in her work. The house felt too quiet without his presence, though she'd grown accustomed to these solo evenings. His architecture firm had been landing bigger contracts lately, requiring more travel, more late nights, more time away. She told herself it was the price of success, the sacrifice couples made when both were ambitious professionals building their careers. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Sophia. "Movie night this weekend? Haven't seen you in forever." Elena smiled, realizing how isolated she'd become. When had she last had a girls' night? When had she last painted something of her own, instead of breathing life back into someone else's vision? A soft chime echoed from Marcus's study across the hall. His laptop, which he'd left charging on his desk. Probably just an email notification. She tried to ignore it, but the sound repeated every few minutes, disrupting her concentration. Finally, she set down her brush and padded across the hardwood floor to his workspace. The laptop screen glowed with incoming message notifications. She hesitated. Marcus was particular about his privacy, always had been, but they were married, and it was just notifications lighting up the screen. She moved the mouse to put the computer to sleep, but the preview text of the latest message caught her eye. "Can't wait to feel your hands on me again." Elena's breath caught. The sender's name was Vivienne. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This had to be some mistake, some spam message or wrong number. But as she scrolled up, more messages appeared, weeks of them, months of them. "Last night was incredible. Your wife has no idea what she's missing. The hotel room is booked for Friday, same place. You make me feel alive in ways she never could." Each message was a blade twisting deeper. Elena sank into Marcus's leather chair, the same chair where he'd hold her some mornings, pulling her onto his lap while she sipped coffee and he checked his emails. Had he been messaging this woman while she sat there trusting and content? She scrolled further back, finding the beginning of their correspondence. 8 months ago. Just after their 5th wedding anniversary, when Marcus had surprised her with a weekend in Napa Valley, when they talked about starting a family, when she'd felt more connected to him than ever before. The messages revealed everything. Vivienne worked at a marketing firm Marcus's company partnered with. She was 26, ambitious, and apparently very impressed by successful older men with wedding rings. The conversations were intimate, detailed, revealing a side of Marcus that Elena thought was reserved for her alone. Her hands shook as she read message after message. Plans for secret meetings, complaints about having to come home to his boring wife, promises that he was working on finding the right time to leave. But the most recent messages told a different story. Marcus seemed to be pulling back, cancelling meetings, growing distant from Vivienne too. Elena closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of his study. The house that had felt like their sanctuary now felt like a stage set, beautiful and hollow. Every photo on his desk, every shared memory decorating these walls, every morning kiss and evening embrace, all of it tainted by this secret life he'd been living. She thought about confronting him, imagined the scene, his shock, his denials, his eventual confession and pleas for forgiveness. She pictured herself screaming, crying, demanding answers to questions that would only bring more pain. But what was the point? The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was the months of lies, the casual cruelty of his words about her, the way He'd made her complicit in her own deception by accepting his kisses after he'd been with someone else. Elena stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She walked back to her studio and looked at the painting she'd been restoring. Some damage couldn't be undone. Some cracks went too deep to repair. Sometimes the most honest thing to do was to acknowledge that something beautiful had been irreparably broken. She picked up her brush and began to clean it methodically, each motion deliberate and final. Tomorrow, she would make her choice. The quiet storm. Marcus pulled into the driveway at 6:47 p.m., 17 minutes later than he'd promised Elena he'd be home. The conference had run long, then his flight was delayed, then traffic, the usual cascade of minor inconveniences that made up business travel. He sat in his BMW for a moment, checking his phone one last time. No messages from Vivian, which was probably for the best. He'd been trying to create distance between them for weeks now, ever since the guilt started, eating at him during those long hotel nights. The house looked different somehow as he approached the front door. Too still. Usually Eleanor would have lights on in her studio, or music playing softly through the speakers they'd installed throughout the house. Tonight, everything was dark, except for the porch light she always left on for him. "Elena," he called as he dropped his luggage in the foyer. "I'm home." Silence answered him. She must be out, maybe dinner with Sophia or a late grocery run. He loosened his tie and walked toward the kitchen, expecting to find a note on the refrigerator or the kitchen island where they usually left messages for each other. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. His laptop sat open, on the kitchen counter, the screen dark but positioned deliberately, as if it had been left there for him to find. Next to it, a single sheet of cream-colored paper, Elena's good stationery, the kind she used for thank-you notes and condolence cards. His name was written across the front in her careful handwriting. Marcus sank onto a bar stool and unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. "Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know about Vivian. I know about the hotels, the meetings, the 8 months of lies you've been living while I trusted you completely. I thought about confronting you, demanding explanations, fighting for what I believed we had. But then I realized that what we had was already over the moment you chose to share your heart and body with someone else. The man I married wouldn't have been capable of the cruelty I read in those messages. I've taken only what's mine. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, they're all yours. I don't want anything that's been tainted by this betrayal. I just want my freedom from a marriage that became a lie. I hope she was worth losing me. Elena P.S. I've left the Caravaggio restoration unfinished in my studio. Some things are too damaged to repair." Marcus read the letter 3 times before the words fully registered. Gone. She was gone. He bolted upstairs to their bedroom, throwing open her side of the walk-in closet. Empty hangers swayed like ghosts. Her jewelry box sat open and hollow on the dresser. Even her pillow was gone from their bed. He ran to her studio, flipping on the lights. The restoration easel stood bare. Her paints, her brushes, her delicate tools, all vanished. Only the damaged Caravaggio remained, propped against the wall, like an abandoned patient in a hospital. The tear across the painted saint's face seemed to mock him now. Marcus collapsed. Into her work chair, the letter crumpled in his fist. When had she found out? How long had she known? The thought of Elena reading those messages, seeing Vivian's explicit words, imagining her discovering his complaints about their marriage, it made him sick. His phone rang. Vivian's name flashed on the screen. He stared at it until it went to voicemail, then immediately rang again. On the 3rd call, he answered. "Marcus, finally! I've been trying to reach you all day. When can we—" "It's over," he said quietly. "What? The conference? I know, baby, but now we can—" "No, Vivian, it's over. Between us, don't call me." Again. He hung up and turned off his phone. The house pressed around him with its emptiness. Every corner held a memory of Eleanor, her laughter echoing from the kitchen where she'd dance while cooking, The dent in the couch cushion where she'd curl up reading on Sunday mornings, the coffee ring stains on his desk from the mornings she'd bring him breakfast while he worked from home. For 8 months, he'd convinced himself that what he had with Vivian was separate from his marriage. She was excitement, danger, the thrill of being wanted by someone young and beautiful who didn't know his flaws and failures. Eleanor was comfort, routine, the safe harbor he could return to after his adventures. But Elena wasn't supposed to leave. Marcus wandered through the house like a stranger. In the kitchen, he opened the refrigerator and found it nearly empty. She'd even taken the leftovers. The coffee maker sat clean and unplugged. Her favorite mug was gone from the cabinet. Every small absence was a fresh wound. He found himself in his study, staring at the laptop that had revealed his betrayal. The screensaver showed a photo of their honeymoon in Greece. Elena, laughing on a beach, her hair wild from the wind, looking at him with such pure joy that it hurt to remember. When had he stopped seeing her that way? When had she become just the familiar backdrop of his life, instead of its brightest light? The worst part wasn't her anger, it was her dignity. No screaming, no broken dishes, no dramatic confrontations. Just a quiet exit and a letter that cut deeper than any accusation could have. She'd seen his betrayal, measured its worth, and decided he wasn't even worth fighting for. Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Elena's number. It went straight to voicemail. Her voice, recorded months ago when everything was still whole between them, asked him to leave a message. But what could he say? That he was sorry, that it meant nothing, that he'd made the biggest mistake of his life? All of those things were true, but none of them could undo what he'd done. He walked back to her empty studio and stared at the damaged painting. Elena had been right. Some things were too broken to repair. But as he looked at the saint's wounded face, in the harsh fluorescent light, Marcus realized that she hadn't been talking about the Caravaggio at all. She'd been talking about them. The house settled around him with creaks and sighs. And for the first time in 8 months, Marcus was completely alone with the weight of what he'd destroyed. Ashes and new beginnings. Elena pressed her forehead against the cool window of the Greyhound bus as it wound through the mountain passes toward Cedar Falls. 3 weeks had passed since she'd left her life behind. 3 weeks of staying in anonymous motels and driving aimlessly through small towns, trying to find somewhere that felt like a place she could breathe again. Cedar Falls wasn't much. A population of 8,000 tucked between pine-covered mountains, the kind of place where antique shops and family restaurants lined a main street that looked like it hadn't changed in decades. But when she'd stopped for coffee at a diner called Millie's, the waitress had mentioned that the local gallery was looking for someone with art experience, and something in Elena's chest had stirred for the first time in weeks. Now, with 2 suitcases and a savings account she'd quietly built over the years, she walked down Maple Street toward her new life. The apartment above the gallery was small, just a bedroom, tiny kitchen, and a living room with windows that overlooked the mountains. But it was hers alone, unmarked by memories of betrayal. "You sure you don't have any gallery management experience?" asked Patricia Henley, the silver-haired woman who owned Mountain View Gallery. She had kind eyes and paint-stained fingers that reminded Elena of her art professor from college. "I know how to care for artwork," Elena said carefully. "I understand. Conservation, framing, lighting. I've worked with collectors for years." She didn't mention that those collectors had been her husband's clients, or that her expertise came from restoring masterpieces in the studio that now sat empty 300 miles south. Patricia studied her for a long moment. "You running from something, honey?" The directness caught Elena off guard. In the city, people minded their own business, accepted surface explanations. But here, in this small town where everyone knew each other's stories, her evasiveness stood out like a neon sign. "Yes," Elena said simply. But I'm running towards something too. I hope. Patricia smiled. Good answer. When can you start? The gallery was nothing like the prestigious auction houses and private collections Elena was used to. Here, watercolor landscapes hung next to pottery made by local high school students. Photography from weekend nature enthusiasts shared wall space with oil paintings that would never see the inside of a museum. But there was something honest about it all, something real that the rarefied art world she'd left behind had somehow lost. Her days developed a quiet rhythm. She'd open the gallery at 10, spending the morning organizing exhibits and helping the occasional tourist select a piece that spoke to them. Afternoons were slower, giving her time to work on the galleries, records and learn about the local artists whose work filled the walls. But it was the evenings that surprised her. For the first time in years, Elena found herself wanting to paint again. Not restoration work, not breathing life back into someone else's vision, but creating something entirely her own. She'd set up a small easel in her apartment's living room, facing the windows that looked out toward the mountains. At first, her hands shook. It had been so long since she'd painted from her heart instead of from expertise. The brushstrokes felt uncertain, the colors muddy and unsure. But slowly, over weeks of tentative attempts, something began to emerge. Abstract at first, sweeps of blue and grey that captured the feeling of mountain mornings, slashes of gold that held the memory of sunset light through her new windows. "You're the girl from the gallery, aren't you?" Eleanor looked up from her sketchpad at Millie's diner, where she'd taken to having breakfast most mornings. A woman about her age, with short auburn hair and laugh lines around her eyes, was sliding into the opposite booth seat, uninvited. "I'm Kate. I run the veterinary clinic down the street. Mind if I sit? This place gets busy, and you're always sitting alone looking mysterious." Elena laughed despite herself, the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. "I'm not mysterious, just new. Same thing in a town this size. So, what's your story? Patricia says you know about art, but you've got that look of someone who's been through something." There it was again, that small-town directness that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. Elena found herself telling Kate about the gallery work, about learning to paint again, about trying to figure out who she was when she wasn't defined by someone else's needs and expectations. She didn't mention Marcus or the betrayal, but somehow Kate seemed to understand the shape of the pain without needing the details. "You know what you need," Kate said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "The art walk. First Friday of every month, all the galleries and studios stay open late. There's wine, cheese, terrible acoustic guitar music, very artsy and sophisticated." She grinned. "Plus, you'd meet people, real people, not just tourists buying magnets." Eleanor hesitated. The thought of socializing, of pretending to be normal and whole when she still felt held together by the thinnest threads, seemed exhausting. But Kate was looking at her with such genuine friendliness that refusing felt churlish. "Okay," she said, "but I might leave early if I get overwhelmed." "Deal." "And Elena, whatever you're running from, it doesn't define you. I can see that from here." That night, Elena stood before her easel with tears in her eyes. For the first time, she was painting a face, not realistic but impressionistic, emotional. A woman, emerging from shadow into light, her features soft but determined. As she worked, she realized she was painting herself, not as she'd been, the careful, accommodating wife who'd lost herself in someone else's needs, but as she was becoming, someone stronger, someone who chose her own path instead of accepting the one chosen for her. The woman in the painting had Elena's eyes, but they held something new. Hope, maybe, or just the quiet confidence that came from surviving your own breaking and choosing to rebuild rather than simply endure. Outside her windows, the mountains stood ancient and unchanging, under the star-filled sky. But inside her small apartment, with paint on her fingers and possibility stretching ahead like an uncharted canvas, Elena felt herself beginning to remember who she'd been before she became half of someone else's whole. She was ready to meet the world as just Elena again. It felt terrifying and wonderful and exactly right. The gentle harbour. The first Friday art walk arrived with an unexpected October snowfall that dusted the mountain peaks and made the town look like something from a postcard. Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror, second-guessing her decision to attend. She'd chosen a simple burgundy sweater and dark jeans, nothing fancy, but it felt strange to dress for social interaction after months of existing in the comfortable anonymity of sweatshirts and solitude. Mountain View Gallery buzzed with more activity than Elena had seen since starting work there 6 weeks ago. Patricia had hung string lights throughout the space and arranged small tables with wine and cheese, transforming the humble gallery into something warm and inviting. Local residents mingled with visitors, their conversations creating a gentle hum that felt worlds away from the pretentious art openings Elena remembered from her old life. "You clean up nice," Kate said, appearing at Elena's elbow with 2 glasses of red wine, "though you still look like you might bolt for the door at any second." Elena accepted the wine gratefully. "I'm working on it. This is the most people I've been around since—" She let the sentence trail off, but Kate nodded, understanding. "Well, you picked a good night. Mrs. Henderson brought her famous spinach dip, and the acoustic guitar guy actually cancelled." Kate gestured toward a corner where an older man was setting up a violin case instead. "Plus, there's someone I want you to meet." Before Elena could protest, Kate was steering her across the gallery toward the far wall, where a tall man with dark hair and gentle eyes was studying one of Patricia's landscape photographs. He wore a navy wool sweater and carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that drew attention without demanding it. "River?" Kate called, and the man turned with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I want you to meet Elena. She's the one I told you about, the gallery's new secret weapon." River extended his hand, and when Elena shook it, she noticed his fingers were stained with what looked like photographic chemicals. His grip was warm and steady. "Kate mentioned you're new to Cedar Falls. How are you finding mountain life?" His voice had a slight rasp to it, like someone who spent more time listening than talking. Elena found herself relaxing despite her nerves. "It's different from what I'm used to, but good different, quieter." "River owns Pages and Provisions down the street," Kate explained. "Books downstairs, photography studio upstairs. He's probably the only person in town who spends more time alone than you do." River laughed, and Elena caught a flash of something in his expression. Not loneliness exactly, but a recognition of solitude chosen rather than imposed. "Guilty as charged, though in my defense, books and photographs make excellent company." "What kind of photography?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. She'd noticed a small photography section in his bookstore window, but hadn't stopped to examine it closely. "Mostly landscapes, some portraits, nothing too exciting." River's modesty felt genuine, without the false humility she'd encountered in her old art world. "Actually, I've been hoping to photograph some of Patricia's paintings for a catalogue she's planning. Kate mentioned you have experience with art documentation." Eleanor felt a familiar flutter of interest, the first time in months that professional talk hadn't made her want to flee. "Some. I used to work with collectors, helping them catalogue and preserve their pieces. Would you mind taking a look at what I've done so far? I could use a professional opinion." Kate grinned and melted away into the crowd, leaving Elena and River standing together in front of a watercolor painting of the valley in autumn. Elena studied the piece, noting how the artist had captured the way morning mist clung to the mountains. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "There's something about the light." "That's what I struggle with in my photos," River admitted. capturing that quality of mountain light. It changes so quickly here, and by the time you notice it, it's already moving towards something else. They talked easily for the next hour, moving from painting to painting as River shared stories about the local artists, and Elena found herself offering insights about composition and preservation. She was surprised by how much she enjoyed the conversation. River listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and never once made her feel like she needed to impress him or prove her expertise. "I should probably let you get back to mingling," River said eventually, glancing around at the still busy gallery. "But would you be interested in seeing my studio sometime? I really would value your input on the catalogue project." Elena hesitated. The invitation felt innocent enough, but something about River's quiet intensity made her pulse quicken in a way that felt both appealing and dangerous. She wasn't ready for complications. Wasn't sure she'd ever be ready to trust someone with her heart again. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. 3 days later, Elena found herself climbing the narrow stairs to River's photography studio above Pages and Provisions. The bookstore below had charmed her immediately, floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with everything from bestsellers to obscure poetry collections, comfortable reading chairs scattered throughout, and the kind of carefully curated selection that spoke of someone who truly loved books rather than just selling them. The studio was a revelation. Natural light poured through large, north-facing windows, and the walls displayed River's work, black and white landscapes that captured the stark beauty of mountain winters, intimate portraits that revealed something essential about their subjects, and a series of photographs documenting the changing seasons in the valley that took Elena's breath away. "These are extraordinary," she said, stopping in front of a photograph of snow-covered pines at sunrise. "You're underselling yourself. This isn't nothing too exciting. This is the kind of work that should be in galleries." River's cheeks colored slightly. "Thank you. That means more coming from someone with your background." He showed her his setup for photographing artwork, and Elena found herself drawn into problem-solving mode, suggesting adjustments to the lighting and positioning that would better capture the subtle textures of Patricia's paintings. They worked together naturally, River implementing her suggestions with quick understanding, while she appreciated his technical skill and artistic eye. "You really know what you're doing," River said, as they reviewed the test shots on his computer. "These are already better than anything I've managed on my own." Elena felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction, the first she'd experienced since leaving her old life. "It's nice to feel useful again. Can I ask what you did before Cedar Falls?" River's question was gentle, but Elena still tensed. "I worked in art restoration, private clients mostly." It wasn't a lie, exactly, just an incomplete truth. River nodded, seeming to sense that there were depths she wasn't ready to share. "Well, their loss is our gain. Would you consider collaborating? On this catalogue, Patricia could probably pay you something, and I'd love to have your expertise." The offer felt like a lifeline, a chance to use her skills for something meaningful without the baggage of her past. "I'd love to." As they cleaned up the equipment, River hesitated near the door. "Elena, I hope this isn't too forward, but would you like to have dinner sometime? Not business," he added quickly, "just dinner." Elena's first instinct was to say no, to maintain the safe distance she'd built around herself. But looking at River's hopeful expression, remembering how easy their conversation had been, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not the desperate longing she'd felt in her marriage, but something gentler, curiosity maybe, or the simple desire for human connection. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it. As she walked home through the early evening air, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months: anticipation for tomorrow. Not the anxious anticipation of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the warm expectation of good things ahead. Above her, the first stars were appearing in the clear mountain sky, and for the first time since leaving her old life behind, Eleanor felt like she might be exactly where she was meant to be. What cannot be restored. Marcus had been driving for 3 hours through mountain roads that seemed designed to punish luxury sedans, following a trail of carefully gathered breadcrumbs that had taken him 2 months to collect. A credit card, charge at a gas station outside Cedar Falls, a forwarded piece of mail to a gallery on Maple Street, a private investigator who'd finally located Elena Reeves, no longer Elena Morrison, working at something called Mountain View Gallery in a town that barely registered on GPS. He pulled up outside the gallery just as the afternoon light was beginning to fade, his BMW looking absurdly out of place among the pickup trucks and sensible sedans that lined the small-town street. Through the large windows, he could see Elena arranging something on the walls, moving with that careful precision he remembered from their home studio. She looked different. Thinner, maybe, but there was something else. A lightness in her movements that he hadn't seen in years. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Elena turned toward the sound. When she saw him, every trace of color drained from her face. "Hello, Elena." She stood frozen for a moment, holding a small watercolor landscape in her hands. Then, with deliberate calm, she set the painting aside and folded her arms across her chest. "How did you find me? Does it matter?" Marcus took a step closer, drinking in the sight of her. 6 months apart had only made him more aware of everything he'd lost. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." Elena's voice was steady, but he could see her hands trembling slightly. "I said everything I needed to say in my letter. That letter nearly destroyed me." "Good." The word came out sharp and clean, without the hesitation he'd expected. "You destroyed me first." Marcus felt as if she'd slapped him. The Elena he remembered would never have been so direct, so unforgiving. She'd always been gentle, accommodating, quick to smooth over conflicts and find middle ground. This woman, looking at him with cool assessment, was someone else entirely. "I made a mistake," he said, falling back on the speech he'd rehearsed during the long drive. "A terrible mistake. But Elena, what we had, our marriage, our love, that was real. That was worth fighting for, was it?" Elena tilted her head, studying him like he was a painting she was trying to authenticate. "Because the man I read about in those messages didn't seem to think so. He called me boring, remember? A comfortable habit he was ready to discard." The words hit him like physical blows. He'd hoped she hadn't read that deeply, hadn't seen the worst of what he'd written about her. "I was angry, confused. Vivian made you feel alive in ways I never could," Elena finished. "Yes, I read that too, along with quite a lot of other things I can't unknow." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. This wasn't going as he'd imagined. In his fantasies of this moment, Elena had been hurt, yes, but ultimately grateful that he'd come for her. She was supposed to see his journey here as proof of his love, his commitment to making things right. "I ended it with her," he said desperately. "The night I found your letter, I ended it completely. I've been in therapy, Elena. I've been trying to understand why I sabotaged the best thing in my life. I know I can be the husband you deserved. The husband I deserved wouldn't have needed to sabotage anything in the first place." Elena moved behind the gallery's front counter, putting distance between them. "And I'm not the wife you left behind anymore." As if to prove her point, the gallery door opened with another chime, and a tall man with dark hair entered carrying takeout bags from what looked like a local restaurant. He stopped short when he saw Marcus, his eyes moving between Eleanor's pale face and the stranger in the expensive suit. "Everything okay here?" the man asked, his voice calm but protective. "River, this is Marcus, my ex-husband." Eleanor's introduction was matter-of-fact, but Marcus caught the slight emphasis on ex. Marcus, this is River. He's a friend. But the way River immediately moved to Elena's side, the way she unconsciously leaned toward him, told Marcus everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a friend. This was who she'd become while he was driving himself crazy with regret and longing. "I'll give you two some privacy," River said diplomatically, but Elena shook her head. No need. Marcus was just leaving. The dismissal stung more than any angry outburst could have. Marcus studied the man who'd somehow taken his place. Unremarkable at first glance, but there was something solid about him, something steady that Marcus recognized with sick clarity. This was the kind of man Elena deserved, the kind of man Marcus had convinced himself he was until he'd proven otherwise. "Elena, please, just give me 5 minutes. Let me explain." "Explain what?" Elena's composure finally cracked, and Marcus saw a flash of the pain he'd caused her. "Explain how you made me complicit in my own humiliation. How you kissed me good morning after spending the night texting another woman. How you let me plan our future while you were planning your exit." The accusations hung in the air between them. River took a protective step closer to Elena, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift. For months, he'd been living in the fantasy that his marriage was merely damaged, not destroyed. That Elena was somewhere waiting for him to come to his senses and fight for her. But looking at her now, really looking at her, he could see the truth. She wasn't waiting. She was living. The woman standing before him was stronger, more confident, more herself than she'd been in years, and she was looking at him like he was a stranger who'd wandered into her new life uninvited. "I loved you," he said quietly, and it sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "You loved having me," Elena corrected. "You loved the idea of a devoted wife who asked for nothing and forgave everything. But you never loved me enough to be faithful. You never loved me enough to choose me when choosing me required sacrifice." Marcus felt tears burning behind his eyes. "What can I do? Tell me what I can do to fix this." Elena's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked almost sorry for him. "Nothing, Marcus. Some things can't be fixed. Some things can only be mourned and left behind." She was using the language of art restoration, and Marcus understood the metaphor with devastating clarity. He was the damage that couldn't be repaired, the flaw that compromised the entire work. "I should go," he said, defeat heavy in his voice. "Yes," Elena agreed gently. "You should." Marcus walked toward the door on unsteady legs, then paused with his hand on the handle. "Are you happy?" he asked without turning around. The silence stretched long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice full of quiet certainty, "I'm getting there." As Marcus drove away from Cedar Falls, watching the town disappear in his rearview mirror, he understood finally what Elena's letter had really meant. She hadn't just left him. She'd outgrown the need for him entirely. The woman he'd taken for granted had become someone who knew her own worth, someone who wouldn't settle for being anyone's second choice ever again. Behind him, in the warm light of the gallery, Elena was building a life that had no room for the man who'd broken her trust. And as much as it destroyed him to admit it, she was right to do so. Some masterpieces, once damaged, could never be restored to their original beauty. Sometimes the only honest thing to do was start over with a fresh canvas. Elena had found hers. Marcus was still searching for his.